back to our Bible studies where we're looking at God's uses of fire throughout Scripture. Today we're jumping ahead into the Old Testament, and this is an event where Elijah gets to see God use fire. But before we get there, Vicar, we left off with Mount Sinai and the golden calf and God using fire there. How do we get from there to Elijah?
This is a good question. So last time we saw the mountain was consumed with fire. Moses went up to receive the 10 Commandments, but the Israelites made this idol, this golden calf, while he was gone and said that it had leapt out of the fire. This made God really angry because they had disobeyed him, and he almost broke off his relationship with them. But he didn't. They renewed their relationship, and he said, "I will be your God, and you will be my people." So the Israelites were God's people. And after they wandered through the desert for 40 years, they finally settled down and became the nation of Israel. They had a land, the promised land, to call their own. For a while, God simply rose up judges to rule them, but they got tired of that and asked for a king to rule them. Now, while they struck it lucky with their second king, King David, and even did pretty well under their third king, King Solomon, eventually things stopped going well for them. They had a king named Ahab, who was a bad king. Ahab did not know God. He did not follow the Lord, his laws, nor did he worship God. He had turned his back on him. In fact, Ahab, the king of Israel, had married his wife, Jezebel, who was an open and strong worshiper of a god named Baal, as well as one named Asherah. And she spread her religion through the whole of Israel and said, "This is the official religion." And Ahab was just kind of like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. Well, this created a lot of problems, and God sent a drought onto Israel to say, hey, what you're doing is not okay. You're not worshiping the right gods. And so Elijah and Ahab had a confrontation about this. And Ahab saw Elijah and said, "Oh, look who it is. You great troubler of Israel." That's what he called him. Elijah, the troubler of Israel. And Elijah was like, no, you. Ahab, you're the one who's troubling Israel. And he said, let's settle this. Let's get together on Mount Carmel. You send 450 prophets of Baal and 400 of the prophets of Asherah. Let's settle this once and for all.
And so there's this bet. And Elijah is pretty much just calling Ahab out and saying, let's see whose God actually acts. We'll set this up and we'll see if God, your God or my God, responds. And what was the bet?
So basically, they would say, let's set up 2 altars. We'll make stone altars, and we'll put bulls on both of the altars. And then, as Moses put it here, and you will call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. Basically, the bet was, we'll make these altars, but we won't light them. Whoever's God lights these altars on fire, he is the God. He is who Israel will worship. Because Israel, as Moses says, as Elijah says, has been limping between 2 choices, and she needs to make a choice and go with the one true God. And the way they're going to determine who's the true God? The one who answers by fire.
And so 450 priests of Baal, 400 priests of Asherah. They have their altar, and they're going to call upon their God in order to get him to act. They're going to invoke him. Now, there's certain practices and specific times for sacrifice in which Baal and Asherah would be close to answer, to hear these prayers, these actions, these practices. And you have Elijah sitting there watching this. So some of these practices were cutting themselves. Some of the practices were shouting so that their gods could hear them. Some of their practices were dancing. And so I think it's great. There is Elijah watching this, and he decides to start taunting them. And he says things like, maybe you need to yell louder because your God is taking a walk. Or, my favorite one is, maybe you need to yell even louder because your God is in the bathroom and can't hear you. These are outright taunts and making fun of, well, truly the false gods that they believe in. And what's interesting is they shout all the more, they cut themselves more, they dance louder, all to get Baal or Asherah's attention.
They do this for hours. This goes on for most of the day. Elijah is generous. He gives them all of this time to do it, but there's not a single spark. Nothing happens. And so Elijah says, all right, guys, it's my turn. He goes over to his altar. He builds it up with 12 stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. He cuts up the bull and puts it on the altar. And then he turns to the people around and he says, hey, go get some water. Dump it on this altar. And then he says, all right, now do it again. Now do it a third time. So they drench the whole altar so that there's water pooling up in it. So that really, there's no way that any human could ever light this on fire like this. And then he prays to God.
And it's a really simple prayer. It's not Elijah invoking or telling God, do this. But he just says, Lord, reveal yourself. Consume this altar with fire. And immediately, fire from heaven falls down and consumes the bull, consumes the water, consumes the stones, consumes the very dust that was there. And the people who have gathered are in awe. And think of this. You're standing there, and you just got done watching all the priests of Baal and Asherah dance, cut, and yell at themselves. And this simple prayer, this simple act of trust, and fire from heaven flows down. God reveals himself in fire, shows that not only he is the true God, but that he is there and present. The people are so amazed at this that Elijah actually tells them to go and seize the 850 prophets and kill them. They are a threat to Israel. They're a threat to the promises that God has given, and God is simply removing them. Again, exercising that he is the one true God, and we are to worship him and him alone.
That is exactly the response that the people have to seeing this. They say, the Lord is God. The Lord is God. God revealing himself in fire like this might remind you of some of the past things that we've talked about, such as when God revealed himself to Moses in the burning bush, or when he led the people of Israel with the pillar of fire, or even last week when the Mount Sinai was consumed with fire. The God who answers by fire, he is God.
Well, as always, I would love to hear your comments. Is this act of God at the request, at the prayer of Elijah, is this an act of judgment or an act of purifying, refining? I'd be curious to read your comments, so please leave them, and God's peace and blessings.